My great aunt, when she was 8 years old, she essentially saved my grandfather, and he wouldn't be around if it wasn't for her. His mother died at childbirth, and she was delivering him, but her mother was bleeding too much, and she couldn't save her mother, but she knew that she could save her brother. She knew what she had to do, and she did it, and she didn't freak out, and she didn't freeze in the moment, and she raised him. The second brother that she saved, they were on their way to Aden from Sana'a, where they lived, a Muslim assistant. And when he realized that there was this girl in her teens and a young boy and basically all of the family's possessions on a donkey, he said, I'm going to take advantage of this opportunity and just run away with their possessions. And so he started to run away with a donkey, but the brother was on there. And she was like, there's no way he's getting away with this. And she started running after him. And then he took her shoes, and she was fighting him and trying to get her bearings and fight him off so that she could protect the possessions and her brother. I can't protect both the possessions and my brother, but my brother is way more important than that.
Ayuni is a term of endearment passed from grandmother to granddaughter. These are the stories of our Middle Eastern and North African Jewish grandmothers. Hi, I'm Drora Rusi, an American-born Hungarian Jew married to an Israeli-born Yemenite Jew.
Hi, I'm Dalia Arusiti-Veroli, and my kids are represented by 4 communities: Yemen, Ashkenaz, Libya, and Italy.
Hi, I'm Sarah Sassoon, and I'm an Australian-born Iraqi Jew. Come explore with us traditions that have traveled through many lands to our hands today.
Hey, and welcome back to Ayuni, Voices of Our Jewish Grandmothers. And I am excited today because we're talking about women as family protectors. We're talking about the strong women in our lives. And I felt very strongly about this episode, particularly because of some family events that we're gonna talk about as we get into it. But I want to introduce this with I feel like we have to go back to biblical times. So even if you go back to one of the first strong women, so Eve may have messed up a little bit. We might have this Lilith thing going, but we're going to get into some of the strong ones that really took control. So you have Miriam, who sang the song, and she's the one that protected her brother Moshe. She's the one that made sure that he survived afterwards, that she had her mother actually nursing her brother. We had later on Devorah, who gave the song and made sure that Barak would go out to war. We had Zipporah, who actually gave her own son circumcision, a Brit Milah. And my favorite quote is from Mordecai to Esther, saying, who knows if this isn't the reason that you got to royalty, that you got to this part. And I think each of us can see ourselves in this way. Who knows if this isn't why we got here? And I think the women that we're going to be talking about today may not be the ones you're going to read about in history books, but they are the reason that we're here today. So I'm going to hand it over first to Sarah and Dahlia. Tell us some of your stories, and let's open it up.
Well, I think one of the great things about sharing these stories is that if you ask these women in our lives about them, they just kind of say okay, so I did this, this, and this, and he was saved. But they don't give it much importance, and they're usually not going to be initiating the conversation on it. You have to ask them very pointed questions. And I think that's what makes these things so special, because they're really heroic acts and they just came sort of naturally to them. So I'll share just first the biggest story that is essentially the reason that I'm here, which is my great aunt. When she was 8 years old, she essentially saved my grandfather, and he wouldn't be around if it wasn't for her. His mother died at childbirth, and she was delivering him. And she listened exactly to what her mother told her to do. But her mother was bleeding too much, and she couldn't save her mother, but she knew that she could save her brother. And this was the first son. So there were 4 girls and then the son. And she from then on was his mother. She was his protector. She raised him, and she was only 8 years old. And she really does tell this story very nonchalant, did tell this story very nonchalantly. And it's really remarkable. It could have to do with different times, because I can't imagine an 8-year-old birthing anyone today. But I think it's still remarkable that she was in this position. She knew what she had to do, and she did it, and she didn't freak out, and she didn't freeze in the moment, and she raised him, and she was his mother till she passed away not that long ago.
What's remarkable about that story is it's exactly like what you were saying, Drora, what Mordechai says to Esther. Maybe it was for this moment that you've been put in this position, just for this moment. And I think those moments where no one would ask to be in a position like your great aunt, it's spectacular to imagine an 8-year-old birthing her brother, witnessing her mother die. It's very, it's like a primal moment of life and death, and having to hold that at the age of 8.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, my grandfather never really had a mother. And it's remarkable that she, throughout her life, I mean, I don't know if she specifically attributed it to it, but she got married very old. She was 16 when she got married, and she just didn't feel like she was in a position that she could like leave the home, because she would have to leave the home and go to the husband's side. And she just felt like she was needed still in the house. She had younger siblings. Her sister got married before her, because she held this responsibility, that she needed to be there for my grandfather, and probably also for her sisters and for her father. And
it's such a heavy load.
Yeah,
it's such a heavy load to carry as a young girl, but that's the position she was in. And in those days, it was expected that she would take it on. These days, I think they'd be sent to an orphanage if the father isn't coping, or it's like a different way of looking at what it is to run a home and keep a home going. And it often fell on the girls.
Yeah, and it definitely was something that this was a path that she continued on from the age of 8. She essentially saved all 3 of her brothers. She has 4 sisters and 3 brothers. Three of those siblings are half siblings, because obviously after my grandfather's mother passed away, there was another wife. But the second brother that she saved, they were on their way to Aden from Sana'a, where they lived, on their way to come to Israel. And Aden was where the Ammonite Jews were gathering in order to make their way to Israel in 1949. And she was with her whole family. They were walking, took a couple of weeks from Sana'a to Aden, and they were all walking together, all the different generations. The older / the younger were on donkeys, and they came to a point in their journey where they had to stop to get water. And the entire family, the entire how do you call it, the clan, all went down to I guess there was some waterfall, and they all went down there to collect water. And she was left in charge of essentially all of their belongings, which were on a donkey, which is also where her youngest brother at that time, she had another brother who was born, who was his name, well, today he is a known rabbi in Israel, and he was on the donkey because he was young, couldn't walk. They had, as I think a lot of families had, they had somebody assisting them on the way, who was Muslim. And they had this Muslim assistant. And when he realized that there was this like girl in her teens and a young boy and basically all of the family's possessions on a donkey, He said, I'm going to take advantage of this opportunity and just run away with their possessions. He thought, what would this young teenager do? No way, she's going to stop me. And so he started to run away with a donkey, but the brother was on there. And she was like, there's no way he's getting away with this. And she started running after him. And then he took her shoes and she was fighting him and trying to get her bearings and fight him off so that she could protect the possessions and her brother. And she describes it as being like really rocky, so it was really painful without her shoes. And at one point she realized, okay, I can't protect both the possessions and my brother. I'm just gonna grab my brother, and if he runs away with the possessions, he runs away with the possessions, but my brother is way more important than that. And she got her brother, and he did run away with the possessions, and they came back, and it took a long time for the rest of the clan to come back. It was already nightfall. Imagine, she was fighting and she also didn't have water. And the family came back after nightfall, and she was probably also a little bit scared because it's getting dark. And she's still very young, even though she's doing these really heroic acts. And the family comes back and her father says, where are all our possessions? And she explains to him what happens, and he was still not so pleased with the situation. And it took years after they already came to Israel and were settled that he said, you know what, you were right. You kept my most precious possession and you did the right thing. But again, that was a moment of, who are you as a young teenager expecting to fight off this Muslim older man who probably is stronger than you, and just motherly instincts that apparently she had from the age of 8 kicked in, and she saved her second brother. And it's just remarkable. Like this, I think there's something about our grandmothers that we've spoken about throughout the season that is just remarkable, and how they know to preserve and save and pass on. And we talk about it in like grand themes, but like here, these are just like little moments that are as grand as the themes that we're talking about. And I like, these are stories that I grew up with. And like I said at the beginning, we asked her, she said them very like pointedly, like, this is what I did. Didn't give it any significance. And but they're stories that I think need to live on, because they're the reasons that my grandfather, my great uncle are around today.
Completely they have to live on. And what strikes me is how her father didn't even recognize what she did. Was even a bit resentful that the donkey got away with the possessions, and instead of being really angry at the Muslim man, which I'm sure he was angry at him, but kind of thinking that his daughter could do everything. And the fact that she had to live with that as well, the fact that, you know, she's thrust in these situations, no fault of her own. She has to birth her brother, watch her mother die. That's like just the situation she's in, and she rises up to that. Then she's left while everyone else gets water. I don't know why they didn't leave a male with her. I mean, why they trusted a Muslim caretaker. They obviously really trusted him, but their trust was misplaced. And there she also had to rise up and save her brother. It's just that the idea of the fact she had to sacrifice of herself and do it with so much modesty is so interesting. I think that's a real theme with our grandmother. So these are like big moments which show her self-sacrifice and her being so big of spirit and big of strength to hold the family together, to know what's important. And yet it's built on all the small moments of self-sacrifice, I think, that women are brought up to do. Like, she would have fed her like brothers and sisters everyday breakfast and dinner, and made sure they were clean. And the idea of keeping home, which have so many small moments of care, and that kind of builds up to these big moments where she has to choose, what do I do? And it's already inbuilt in her. She has to save her brother, even if her feet are bleeding from rocks. It's like there's just this thing of it's something I struggle a lot with. What it means to be a woman and what our grandmothers did is the self-sacrifice that was also involved. And it's just part of it. It feels like it's part of the structure of it. And there's no clean answer where they begin and the children end. Like there's no clear, I don't have a clear answer. What's right, what's wrong. I'm just saying what is.
Right. And I think part of this is that they came to Israel, and the scholarship shows that when they came to Israel, they had to step up. The women are the ones that stepped up and had to be the main, they were often the main breadwinners because the men were just couldn't function in this new way because the women are encouraged to step up. And it talks about, the scholarship that I've read talks about the women kind of a change in power structure within the home. And then I listen to these stories, I'm like, yeah, the women may have been the quiet ones, but they're the ones that were controlling things. And, I think about, again, because I have to go back to biblical quotes, but, "B'zchut nashim tzidkaniot niganu mimitzrayim," like, because of righteous women, that's the way we got out of Egypt. So they weren't the ones that are going to go stop the slave masters, but they were the ones that made sure that the people were strong enough and they themselves were strong enough to go do the work and do what needs to be done within the home and without. And one of the things I love about this family, and really what made me want to research more, is there were a few different times where my father-in-law created this family reunion. And you'd think it's a almost completely Yemenite family. So they have a lot of this patrilineal society in it. And I think I've spoken about that they were often not allowed any non-Yemenites into the family. And that was because my grandfather-in-law controlled it. And yet at this family reunion, there was a whole panel of women sitting in front, and my father-in-law, but mostly women sitting in front. And it was a question and answer. Can you imagine doing this? I don't know could they have imagined doing this in Yemen or anything? The respect that they understand now, I thought was so beautiful, and the power that they gave these elderly grandmothers to share their stories that they never thought were real stories, but they're showing them how much they appreciate them. And I just thought that was beautiful.
Right. And you're 100% right that when the Jews from the Middle Eastern and North African countries came to Israel, the power structure within the family changed because suddenly everything fell apart. The father's role before was to lead the family, to earn a living, to provide for the family. The mother's role was to create the home and rear the children. When they came to Israel, they were living in tent camps. There was no home anymore. There were no jobs anymore. Food was really dodgy. All of Israel was under the Senna period. It was a depression time. They were getting food on ration cards, and it was all like margarine and a little like black bread. And suddenly the structure had broken down. The communities were not together anymore. Iraqis were with Yemenites and Romanians, and everyone was, all these Jews from all these different countries were mixed together as well. So you not only lost your home, you lost the community you surrounded yourself with, the people you knew, your family structure of wider family. And the men really did collapse. They didn't have the resources. Without a job, without their title, without, their clean, crisp suits going to bank or wherever they work. And there really are sad stories about that when they came to Israel. And the women, because women, and this is my theory, because women's work is daily, because it's about real, very tangible acts, like you're making breakfast, I'm making rice porridge for breakfast, I'm boiling an egg. Not that they had that in the Mabarot, in the tent camps, but the need that life has to continue because the children need to eat and they need to be clothed. And that kept them going when the men had nothing, they had lost their status, while the women's status was still pretty much intact. They were still mothers, they were still wives, and they had to create a home out of the dust and in a canvas tent, and that was their job. And it was, and like we're talking about, when the moment comes, what do you do? Do you rise up? Not all the women managed to rise up, but I know, for example, my grandmother, I was with my dad and he was describing for the first time, he admitted they were in the Ma'bara. I got him to admit 2 weeks ago. And he was, by driving him there, to Pardes Chana and Zichron Yaakov, and he was telling me the way he'd walked to, like, hours to school. And one of the things he said he'll never forget, they used to receive bags of white flour from the joint. And my grandmother would take the bags after the flour was finished and wash them and sew them into sheets. So you can just imagine that kind of labor that went into keeping the home together, to have a sheet. It's just a way of life we can't imagine, but my grandmother lived up to that. And if she could do it in the Ma'bara, how much more so when I was growing up with her was she doing it in a house in Sydney. And every meal that we went to her was with a lot of joy and richness, I think because of the Ma'bara experience, because of the tent camp experience, because of what she had to help then. When you go through that, every time you eat a bowl of rice with bamia and lamb, it's like, once upon a time we did not have that, and now we have it. So there's a lot of joy also in the everyday acts of creating home when it's lost. So I feel like the everyday holds a lot of power. And it's kind of like, it's not sexy to make breakfast and clothe children and wash them. It's really not. That we underestimate the power of the everyday, boring ritual of what it is to be a mother. And the only time we really remember how important it is when we lose it. Someone who has a mother who does not perform the tasks of giving food and clothing and breaks down and does not cope. A child from that home knows the difference of what it means to have a mother and what it is not to have a mother. And so when we talk about protecting women, powerful women, I really, really want to honor the everyday woman as well. And then in those moments where they're called on to step up and protect, they have that power.
And I think one of the things that happened, in addition to being the mothers and being the house, keeping the house together, is when they came to the Western countries, especially in Israel, they also had to work outside the home. And that's one of the things I know that my grandfather-in-law never learned Hebrew. He was a street cleaner and he would just do enough to get by so that he could sit and learn and do whatever needs to be done on that side. And the women were the ones that went out to work. And so they're the ones that actually learned Hebrew. They might not know how to read and write, but they were the ones that went out and they were the ones that worked. And so,
well, didn't learn modern Hebrew because he knew the Torah probably backwards, forwards. But yeah, continue.
Correct. Yeah, no. Speaking Hebrew, you're 100% right. And some of these women who went out, one of the beautiful things also we saw afterwards and see today are those women who continued, and like our generation or these two generations are continuing to tell the story. And one of the people that I think is, and we hopefully will have her on next season, is Levana Zamir, who made Aliyah from Egypt. And one of the quotes she says, and I think since we're talking about strength, one of the quotes she says is, strength is not always taught in books. It's lived in silence and in song. And she's not so silent, I have to say. She's the one that gets out there, but she recognizes what it is. And if you look into some of the strength of some of these people, some of these women who came, again, you might not know it on first thing. They're not going to tell you, oh, I'm the hero here. But there are heroes.
I want to bring up another story from my husband's side, which also I guess it connects with the silence, because the way that my mother-in-law described it is with a lot of silence. And it has to do, it could be that there are thousands of these stories from those moments, like I mentioned, with Tivia and my great aunt and her brother on their journey to Aden. So all these moments, basically when these communities collapsed and everyone just didn't know what was happening, and there were so many uncontrollables, and I'm sure there's so many stories of women stepping up. So my husband's grandmother, basically, when they were still living in Libya in 1967, and then the Six-Day War broke out at the beginning of June, and basically the whole community was wasn't kicked out, but was told that we can't protect you here, so figure figure it out. And but those initial days, there were riots, pogrom. It was really a terrible situation. And the story that I want to share is the first morning when they realized that something is not going well. My mother-in-law was 5, and she was in her preschool class, I guess, or kindergarten class, and she was in a Catholic school because at that point there were Italian schools, many were Catholic, and it was a very stressful morning. She said she remembers, and the parents started picking up their kids. They weren't all Jewish kids, and her brother, who's younger than her, were taken aside by the nuns and were brought to an inner room and told not to go outside. Soon your parents will come pick you up. And then she didn't know how much time passed. Obviously, as a 5-year-old girl, it felt like forever. And then her mother comes, but she didn't recognize her mother because she was wearing these really thick sunglasses and covered her hair, which she didn't usually do. And her mother didn't say anything, took them to the car. Inside the car, she saw that her step-grandmother was there too. And they just drove in silence. Her mother didn't say anything. She was on the wheel, and she said that was very strange because usually her mother's not on the wheel. I asked where the father was, and she said she didn't know maybe what was the conversation before, why specifically her mother came. It could be that he was more recognizable, and if he would leave, then they would be better targets for the Muslims, and she could somehow cover herself up, and she was less well known. She didn't know, but her mother doesn't usually drive, took it upon herself to go into what she knew was probably a dangerous situation, leaving the house to pick up her kids. They drove in silence. The step-grandmother was reading some prayers. It could be Tehillim, it could be Psalms. She didn't know exactly, but was reading the entire time, didn't look up at the kids, didn't say anything. Their mother brought them a croissant so that they would just be occupied with something good. And they just drove in silence. And then her mother took an alleyway that they don't usually take to get home. Maybe she was trying to avoid crowds, but then all of a sudden at the end of the alleyway, there was a bus that somebody stopped as if to say, like, everyone come off the bus. A lot of men started coming off the bus and came towards their car in the alley and blocked their way of getting out. Not only did they block it, but they also came towards the car. They started banging on the windows, and the whole time the step-grandmother is just reading prayers, whatever the prayers are. Mother isn't saying anything, silence. She's just trying to get out of the situation, staying calm, not freaking out. And in the back are the 2 kids. All of a sudden, her brother starts freaking out himself, crying hysterically. She said memories of a 5-year-old girl. She remembers his croissant falling out of his hand onto the floor. And just, she, again, doesn't know how long it was for. It just felt like forever. And then all of a sudden, somebody in front of the car, she sees him saying something to the other men, and she didn't know what he was saying. Her mother, like years later, told her that he was telling them, it's not worth dwelling on these 4 Jews. There are plenty of others. Let's go find others. And they essentially part the path for them. The men step aside, and her mother puts her foot to the gas and zooms out of there as fast as she could. They get to the house. They run inside, close all the windows, and the windows are closed for a month until they can get out of the country. But like, this is a family story that they tell. I don't think the grandmother tells it as much, but it's very important for them to keep this story in their memory, because she did what she had to do to save her kids, and definitely in a situation that she was probably scared out of her mind, didn't know what she was getting herself into, and did whatever it was to protect her kids and to get them home and to get everyone to be together in their safe spaces, safe as it was. But it was a very, very stressful moment. And I must say that after that month, when they finally were getting out, she did, again, I think a pretty heroic act, even if you could say it's a motherly act, but they had the opportunity to leave. But she was having a miscarriage and she couldn't leave. She had to be hospitalized. So she told her husband and her kids, go. She didn't know she would be able to get out of the country, but at least they would be able to save themselves. She was in the hospital. There was another Jewish woman with her, but she said every Muslim woman that walked in, she didn't know what would happen to her, because it seemed like all their neighbors were turning on them. So she didn't know if these like nurses would all of a sudden do something to her. But she needed to take care of herself in order to be able to leave the country. And only later was she reunited in Italy with her family. But keeping the family together and protecting them and making sure that everyone comes out of this terrible situation that we can look back on and understand, but there was no way they were understanding what was going on since they were living there forever. and it was a very, very scary moment that she just knew what she had to do as a mother, as a protector.
It's terrifying, just terrifying to imagine what she went through and what so many women had to go through as they fled their countries of origin. That's the problem. It's the idea of neighbors turning on you, of not knowing who you can trust. It's a difficult story.
Yeah.
And I think so. One of the things that's beautiful that's happening nowadays is that these stories are coming out more, and it's might not be the generation we're talking about. It might be more, let's say, 60-year-olds. So, like the story you just told, she's talking about her mother. So that's the generation that's finally starting to talk about it. So you have like Ilana Ibrahimi, who wrote her memoirs in Iran, or Regina Manaver. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right. I'm sure I'm not. But she also talks about growing up in Iran and trying to understand coming out of there, and the restrictions there and how you free yourself, and how the mothers really had to go through so much. Or Dahlia, do you remember her last name?
Abraham Klein.
Dahlia Abraham Klein, who talks about her mother, I believe, being born in prison. It's just these stories.
In Iran?
In Afghanistan?
Afghanistan, there you go. I believe that's where it was.
Wow.
So I'm so excited to see that these stories are coming out there. We have to make sure that we're reading them and we're sharing them and we're talking about them.
Right.
Because they're there.
Exactly. And these are the silent stories, and it's especially important to talk about it now, especially what's going on in Iran right now, as this really is the fight for women's freedom. It's the fight for women's voices and the right to go on in the streets without a hijab, the right to their own lives. And it's the idea of a woman's story and the importance of telling them is actually such an important Middle Eastern and North African idea, because these are societies that don't necessarily encourage women to tell their stories. This is what the home is, a very private place. A woman's meant to be modest. And these are cultures that encourage that. And those are good values. Those values are good values in terms of modesty and having a strong home. But the gift of the West, and this is what the women found when they came to Israel from the Middle East and North Africa, is that they could also write a bit of their own story and make decisions for themselves. So while in Iraq a girl was born, and who she was going to marry was the main question that would determine the rest of her life. In Israel, it could be not only who you marry, but what you study. And a woman is allowed out of the house and to be part of society. that it's like a hard thing to say. I love Iraq and I've always wanted to go back there, but it was a society where the girls were constrained. And I think what I'm looking for as a woman of Iraqi descent, Jewish descent, is that balance of East and West, where the home is valued and a mother is valued, and the strength and protectiveness that a mother offers her children for future generations, that strength that I got from my grandmother, who came from the world of who a woman married determined the rest of her life. I can take her strength and those values that build a very strong home and safe home, create that same home, but also be out in the world somehow to balance both. And maybe that's why we're discussing women and the strength of women. It's not just for the stories of the past, but to understand the societies they came from, how they were such strong figures in saving lives, but also creating foundations for children to grow, for us to grow, and how we can take that into our own lives as modern women now. That's really the question I always have. Why do I look back? Why am I so obsessed with my grandmother? Because she planted so much strength in me. And sometimes I feel I'm failing, by the way, to give the same strength to my children. But then I realize every meal I cook goes a long way. And food is a great love language. And hopefully I've inoculated them with the love of my grandmother as well. So they feel that Iraqi Jewish love, that holding mother love, and they can go out and be strong men who respect women in the world, since I have 4 boys and 1 girl.
Yeah, and I think by us telling these stories, we're, like you said, we're not living in the past. We're bringing them to us today, and so God willing, we won't ever be in situations that some of these stories took place in. But we know that even in the slightest moments of difficulty, there's a lot of strength in us that we can learn from our ancestors on how we can cope with it and find ways out of it, and also ways to make things better and improve. And I think that's why these stories are really, really important for us to tell, because we, as you said, we're the meeting point of the East and West, and it's our job to be their voice, to tell their stories, to inspire others.
And I just realized as you were talking, we have to mention Rachel from October 7th, who baked cookies for the terrorists. Just when you're talking about bringing your strength and your power and the inner strength, baking cookies as the terrorists come into her home, or sorry, feeding them cookies as the terrorists come into her home. Again, the strong stories that we need to tell.
And she was also Mizrahi. She was from the Middle East. She was from the North African, Middle Eastern, North African. She was Moroccan, right? So that's the point, because that is our strength as women. It's the ability to give your child a croissant when you're picking them up in a terrifying situation. It's the idea that it's not about being great, but rather responding to the situation as needed. And what's our tools? Our tools is feeding others. Our tools is holding home, giving meals, giving comfort, and seeing the other human being. When she gave the cookie to the terrorist, she saw him, even though he was holding a gun and had come to kill her. She saw him as a human being. And that is the strength of mothers and women, to humanize us and remind us that we are trying to build a better world together. And in that situation, she humanized him enough that she saved her own life and her husband's life. So the strength of women should never be underestimated, even if it's quiet, even if it might be just a cup of tea. Never underestimate the strength of mothers and women.
And I think that's a powerful way to close out this season. And as we're all in this new world where we're not sure what's real and what's not real, as Sarah was saying before everybody got on with us, but the concept of you can have a whole AI creator today.
A whole AI actress who you don't know is real. We can start watching movies with AI characters. They're not even real anymore. What's going to be real? I said to myself when I saw this Instagram post about Tilly Norwood. I'm like, well, what's real? And I realize what's going to be more and more important are our homes, is the cup of tea you share with a good friend, with your child, with your spouse, with a partner. It's going to be more real, the human interactions we have where we see each other face to face. Because who knows, someone might take our podcast and make an AI thing of it. And then you'll have to come to us in person. We'll have to have like gatherings as communities and tell these stories face to face and hold each other as humans. And that's the future, I think. The future is still the kitchen. The future is still human connection. And that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing to be reminded that small and silent is actually much bigger and more powerful than words can even express.
So thank you all for coming with us and coming into our kitchen, our metaphorical kitchen. And we hope to continue this, and we want to invite you in more. So we want you to share your stories. We want you to share your grandmother's stories or your personal stories. Next season, we're excited to have you come and share your stories, come into our physical kitchens almost, because we're going to have actual women who live these. They're going to come and be interviewed. We might even have some men to mix it up a little who know the women's stories. We want to share these stories. We want to share the power and the strength, and we want to know how to incorporate it into our lives for the future.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Ayuni, Voices of Our Jewish Grandmothers, is brought to you by Jewish Unity Through Diversity in partnership with Sarah Sassoon. Our executive directors are Drora Arusi, Sarah Sassoon, and Dalia Arusi Di Veroli. Our theme music is by Oshrat Chaim. Please rate and review this episode wherever you're listening to the podcast, and don't forget you can also watch on YouTube. And let us remind you that these stories live on when we share them. So please share your stories with us of women who held together families and communities throughout the ages in different lands. Email us at ayunivoices@gmail.com, and we might feature your story on the next episode. Stay tuned.